So the first presentation we're going to have is by Bob Larsen from the Lahontan. I didn't even ask Lahontan. I'm sorry. I should have asked ahead of time. The Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board. Bob Larsen is a senior environmental scientist at the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board. He has worked on erosion control, stormwater management, and water restoration efforts at the Lake Tahoe for more than 15 years. Mr. Larsen holds a master's degree in soil science from the University of California, Davis, and currently manages the Lake Tahoe TMDL implementation and associated policies for the state of California. And presenting with him is John Burns, Senior Program Manager. John is a Senior Project Manager at Sitka Technology Group in Portland, Oregon. His career is focused on combining computer science with civil and environmental engineering. At Sitka, there we go. He was a civil engineer in stormwater planning for the city of Portland. His love of technology and passion for the natural environment are apparent in a BS in computer engineering from Oregon State University, followed by an MS in environmental engineering from Oregon Health and Sciences University. He has 15 years of experience developing and managing technology projects in the environmental and stormwater realms. So we'll go ahead and hear their presentation first.
Give it a second.
Thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. I can see it's a lively after lunch crowd, so thanks for joining us. I also really want to thank the CASQA conference organizers because they put together a really nice theme for this conference, the Summer to See, which actually fits really well with our talk today. So what we hope to talk to you about today is how we're able to leverage some of the technology tools that we developed up in Lake Tahoe to help implement some stormwater solutions in Orange County. So again, the Summit to See is a nice fit for us today. Since I don't know much about Orange County, I want to start off talking about Lake Tahoe a bit and then turn it over to John to talk a little bit more about how we've developed some of the software tools. So as you probably know, Lake Tahoe is a high mountain lake straddling the California-Nevada state line and sits at about 6,200 feet. The circumference of the lake, about 72 miles, 1,700 foot deep. It's a nice lake. If you haven't been there, come up and see us. We've been monitoring clarity at Lake Tahoe for close to 50 years now. Clarity is a really nice holistic integrator of the health of the lake. And the folks at UC Davis measured that using the Secchi disk. As you can see from the trend line, unfortunately, the trend isn't good for us. Starting in the 60s and 70s, we regularly see average annual clarity values on the order of 80 to 100 feet. And we're more closer to about 60 or 70 feet these days. So the loss in clarity is, again, an indicator of some of the problems in the watershed health itself. So in response to that clarity loss, the Lahontan Water Board on the California side and the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection coordinated to develop the Lake Tahoe TMDL, again, to address that clarity loss problem. So after about 10 years and $10 million worth of research evaluating the clarity issue, we found that Lake Tahoe is losing clarity because there are things floating in the water. Come to find out that those things aren't just your average things. We actually sort of created our new class of pollutant in Lake Tahoe. We found that inorganic fine sediment particles less than 16 microns in size have a disproportionate influence on Lake Tahoe's clarity. Come to find out the large surface area on those particles is very effective at refracting light, and again, it's responsible for about 2/3 of the clarity loss in Lake Tahoe. They also stay in suspension for a very long time. We did a pretty detailed source analysis trying to figure out where those particles come from. Not surprisingly, a lot of the particles, up to 72% of them, are coming from our urbanized landscape. So Lake Tahoe's clarity was doing it okay, and then we urbanized the landscape and come to find out we're losing it, and there's a link there. So we did some detailed modeling to assess what we needed to do to restore clarity, and we need a reduction of about 32% to halt the clarity decline and start the restoration, and we need up to 65% of clarity, of load reduction loss, or load reduction response to actually restore Lake Tahoe's clarity to historic conditions. So what are we going to do about that? As indicated, I'm from the Water Board, so the thing to do is write a permit and require the municipalities to address that problem. Again, not surprising that the urban environment is the big source of the problem, and there's a big opportunity there as well for load reduction. So we're requiring the municipalities to reduce their fine sediment particle load as measured from a 2004 baseline. We included those load reduction requirements in their Phase 1 NPDES permit on the California side. But unlike other permits, we didn't specify specific actions that need to be done to achieve those load reductions. We essentially developed a performance-based permit that provided that flexibility to the local governments to figure out how they wanted to achieve those load reductions. And those are tracked using a standardized metric known as the clarity credit. The clarity credit has a direct relationship to the fine sediment particles themselves. We actually count the number of fine sediment particles that are in suspension as well as delivered to the lake on an average annual basis. And so you see these large numbers in scientific notation. So 1 credit equals 1 times 10 to the 16 particles. In layman's terms, if I had a brick here, it's about a 200-pound brick of toner cartridge dust. So really, really fine material and about 200 pounds of it. It's worth noting also that the actions that we take to reduce fine sediment particles in Lake Tahoe are also pretty effective at reducing the nutrients as well that feed some of the alfalfa. So the other important point with respect to the permit and our approach is to provide standardized program tools. So the Lake Clarity Crediting Program is again a holistic way for folks to be able to link the actions on the ground with the expected benefits and to be able to track compliance. Just a few quick notes of how that works. It's basically a 3-step process. The first step being to define the credit potential. We use a standardized model known as the pollutant load reduction model to provide an estimate of pollutant load reduction associated with various activities. That's documented in what we call a catchment credit schedule, essentially setting forth the expectations. And then we assess ongoing performance and compliance by actually linking those estimates to on-the-ground inspection practices that evaluate what's happening in the field as it relates to the model variables, and assuming that those things line up, that the field conditions are consistent with the way things were modeled, we can award the credits and achieve compliance. The last point here is really an adaptive management process, right? We need to be able to report out on what we're doing and also have the ability to adjust and change the program over time in response to science and new information. Just a few quick points on the lessons learned here. It's really handy and useful to be able to develop your policy and your policy assessment tools at the same time to make sure that those things track. We found that we were a little bit out front on some things, and so being able to actually, again, assess your compliance tools at the same time as you're setting up your regulations provides a little bit of consistency there. Most importantly, there's going to be uncertainty in the process, and sharing that uncertainty by making sure that the program is consistent and predictable, make sure that our urban partners aren't continually chasing a moving target. And we've heard pretty consistently by some partners who are in the room, actually, that it's not useful when we're constantly changing things on them. They need to know and understand and be able to predict what compliance looks like so they can plan accordingly. That said, we also need the process to be able to change the program, as I said, in response to new information. So it's finding that balance of being able to maintain a conversation with our urban partners and be able to adaptively manage the program, incorporate new science and make adjustments, while at the same time kind of finding that predictability and reduce the uncertainty. So there's a lot going on with the Tahoe program. I'm happy to chat with anybody about it. I usually give pretty detailed presentations on the TMDL and crediting program overall, but at this time I'm going to turn it over to John Burns to talk more about how we've integrated this into a really handy software platform.
Thank you, Bob. As Bob said, I'm here to talk about some technology that is being used to make the Lake Clarity Crediting Program and the Tahoe TMDL possible as a sort of detailed accounting system. This notion of the credits that have to be tracked and reported by the jurisdictions and then reviewed and validated by the regulators. It's important to have workflows and an accounting package that make the data transparent and verifiable and user-friendly for folks to report on. So something interesting about what we're doing to support the Lake Clarity Crediting Program is this is a shared platform for both the regulators and the regulated jurisdictions. I think that's somewhat unique to have both sort of sides of the regulatory equation coming together and using a shared platform to enter the data on the jurisdiction side and then submit it for review by the regulators and have this kind of holistic approach. And we're really focused on the workflows to make the data entry as painless as possible. You know, nobody likes to be transcribing numbers into a system or entering data, but we do try to build a system that folks will willingly use and not grumble about too much. Kind of joke, I don't know if this resonates with folks or not, but a TurboTax-like approach where nobody likes to file their taxes, but when I get in there once a year, at least it walks me through the steps and I get done pretty quickly through the kind of intuitive workflows and prompting questions. And then making the technology the actual system of record for demonstrating compliance, having auditability and validation of the inputs so that folks are confident that this system of record is maintained and supported and can be trusted. So in order to integrate the Lake Clarity Crediting Program technology to make these tools available, we've Bob on the California side and his counterpart on the Nevada side decided to leverage some existing work that Sitka had built with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. This was the Lake Tahoe Info Platform, which was built to initially track the capital actions that are occurring to build restoration projects, stream bank restoration projects, or private development projects, and really demonstrate what was being done on the capital side. So this kind of shared infrastructure, we realized that through the multiple agencies who were already getting into a platform to report their annual capital accomplishments, they already had accounts in the system and the infrastructure was already there. This kind of provided a really cost-effective way for the overlap with what the capital reporting requirements were versus the TMDL reporting requirements to be met with some shared technology and thereby lower the infrastructure costs. The folks at the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, the TRPA, they were really interested in open solutions. You know, the work that we've been doing in the Tahoe Basin is funded by a variety of public agencies, EPA funding, funding through the Southern Nevada Land, what was it, SNPLMA, the Southern Nevada Land Management Act. So there was this philosophy that public investment should be made broadly available, both within the Tahoe Basin and then making that technology available for others to build upon rather than having to start from scratch and reinvent the wheel. And then this notion of regional partnerships, not having one agency feel like they needed to have ownership of the technology, but rather saying, TRPA led the initial stand-up of the platform, but then inviting others in to fund and participate and not really have a sense of ownership. TRPA sees themselves as the platform coordinator, not the platform owner, and it's really invited for other agencies at the federal, state, or local level to kind of have their needs met in this shared platform. So there's some sort of core values around Lake Tahoe Info, making it a regional system, making it accessible to the public and to the technical users, allowing adding modules like we did with the Lake Clarity Crediting Program, making the data relevant and transparent. It's kind of a core value of government, publicly funded data, where possible, to make it available to the public easily. And then this notion of connecting the actions on the ground to the environmental outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the specific interfaces that we built to support the Lake Clarity Crediting Program and the Tahoe TMDL. So initially, we got to build up the BMP inventory, defining the types of BMPs that are present. There was some existing science on the ground that had classified BMPs according to 12 distinct types, and then a suite of observations around those BMPs that would be used to correlate observations that can be quickly made about a BMP to the expected performance in terms of that fine sediment load reduction that Bob's looking to see. BMPs can be added to the inventory. The expected parameters for an ideally functioning BMP are set, and then those can be benchmarked against the actual observations on the ground to determine if we're getting that load reduction from a particular site. So that assessment occurs through a workflow and a scoring process where periodically, several times a year, folks are going out and taking these rapid assessments, observations of the BMP, and then generating a relative condition score from 0 to 5. Where above a certain threshold of 3 on the 3 to 0 to 5 scale would be considered to be functioning at the minimum threshold to meet those load reduction requirements. And that score then, if you're below a certain threshold, would not be assumed to be reducing fine sediment as needed to meet the And so in addition to the physical BMPs that are installed, there's also a road operations component. Up in the mountains, a lot of, dozen feet of snow, more in the winter, a lot of need to put that traction control stuff down, the grid that then washes into the road. So it's really a critical component to the fine sediment reductions, operating the roads, through street sweeping and other activities to make sure that the road operations component is being tracked and assessed similarly to the BMPs. So now that we've got an inventory of the BMPs and an inventory of where the road management practices are in place, there's a need to kind of communicate back from the jurisdictions to the regulators that the roads are being operated effectively and the BMPs are being installed and maintained. So this is done through what's called a registration, which is the agreement between the regulators and the jurisdictions to achieve those regulatory targets and provide that consistency by installing and maintaining the treatment BMPs and operating the roads. And so what the registrations do is they provide transparency and predictability in terms of here's where the jurisdiction says they're going to invest to meet their load reduction requirements, and the regulator can see and verify that that will be on track towards the targets, and then have the reporting tools on the operations to show that that's occurring. So after a jurisdiction installs their BMPs and demonstrates that they're maintaining those BMPs, it's important to show on an annual basis that we're continuing to expand the areas that are treated as the requirements to remove sediment tighten over time. The results of the annual road and the BMP assessments are demonstrating that the expected reductions are being met. And then there's an annual workflow by which the jurisdictions can log in, enter their data, and Bob gets a notification saying, hey, it's time to come in and put your stamp on it. And if everything went smoothly, and most of the time it does, Bob can approve that he can validate that what was said the permit required is actually occurring. Or if he has an additional question, there's feedback loops by which Bob can log his any questions that he might have and send those back to the jurisdiction and kind of get a pretty rapid feedback loop in terms of any place where there's additional information needed or questions around how progress is being made. And then through this annual process, we're able to roll up the individual BMP performance in individual areas that are registered and show how that is contributing to a jurisdiction-wide summary. So the interface that you see here is showing for one of the Placer County jurisdiction how they've exceeded, in this case, their annual credit targets and load reductions. So this is really all about connecting actions to outcomes. That's kind of a theme of the Lake Tahoe Info platform, and that's facilitated through the different modules in LT Info, where I talked initially LT Info was a capital projects tracker, which is an early action, a primary action that would be taken. The installation of the treatment BMPs and investment of those road operations are tracked in terms of what's spent and what are we expecting to accomplish through capital investment. And then we confirm that these capital investments are being maintained and operated effectively through the BMP inspection process. And then another module in LT Info is the monitoring dashboard, where we're actually connecting to in-stream monitoring networks to show in a way that the public can see that the monitoring of the in-stream conditions is an intermediate step between the installation of the BMPs and the lake clarity, that's reflected and transparent. And then ultimately, that in-stream monitoring is going to be reflected in increase in the lake clarity through rolling up those indicators and comparing what the lake clarity program shows is occurring versus what the actual SECI depth measurements are demonstrating. So it's this kind of full soup to nuts, actions to outcomes story that really is made possible by a shared modular platform, bringing together the capital tracking, the observations and inspections, and then the roll up of the final desired outcomes. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is this kind of led with the Summit to the Sea that Bob mentioned, that the partners in Lake Tahoe are really interested in making their technology investments available to others so that both the features can benefit other jurisdictions at a lower cost than if you had to start from scratch, but it's not totally altruistic. The Tahoe folks have an interest in gaining functionality that others might build upon outside of the Tahoe region and showing that, having that come back to lower the long-term cost and functionality that the Tahoe folks would receive. And so the TRPA worked to make the Lake Tahoe Info Platform source code available under an open source license. This is kind of an experiment where TRPA and the other Tahoe partners are working with Sitka to say you can sign on and start using this technology either independently, just download the source code off of GitHub, which I'm showing here, and anybody could download and stand up their own versions of these applications, or work with a firm like Sitka to start building modules of your own. This is done through a very permissive license. It's called the AGPL, which really helps jurisdictions. Vendor lock-in is kind of a scary thing when you're working with a technology provider, and we don't. We want to help folks avoid that. And what this does by going with a license platform, open source license platform like this, is ensure that you always have ownership. The ownership of the technology and ownership of the data is legally bound into the community. And so far, this experiment is really working kind of in more than, even better than we'd expected. There's 6 agencies outside of the Tahoe Basin, the state of Idaho, 2 agencies in the state of Washington, the resource conservation districts throughout the state of California who are using the capital projects tracking module. And we've started to see functionality that's now being funded outside of California, outside of the Tahoe Basin, actually come back and be used by the Tahoe folks. So that's a pretty cool story. And so far, that experiment seems to be panning out on the capital project side. And then more recently on the BMP inventory and stormwater side, you're going to hear how folks in Orange County have been leveraging some of that investment in the stormwater tools. So that's really what I had to share, and I'm looking forward to the conversational panel part of this to hear some questions from you guys. Thank you.